For thousands of years, humans needed power for grinding grain, pumping water, and sawing wood. But power required muscle, human or animal, which meant exhaustion, cost, and limits on what could be accomplished. Rivers could turn water wheels, but only if you lived near flowing water. Most of the world had no such luxury. People were bound by geography, their productivity limited to what their bodies could sustain and what rivers happened to flow nearby. Then, around the 9th century in Persia and later perfected across Europe, builders created structures with massive blades that caught something invisible and free: the wind. The windmill transformed moving air into rotating power. Wind pushed against sails or blades, turning a shaft that could grind grain, pump water from low lands, or drive sawmills. Suddenly, power existed everywhere the wind blew. The Netherlands reclaimed land from the sea using windmills to pump water continuously. Farmers ground grain without exhausting themselves or their animals. Remote villages gained capabilities once reserved for riverside towns. The windmill democratized power itself, making it available to anyone with open sky and steady breezes. Entire landscapes transformed as marshes became farmland and productivity soared. What makes the windmill so inspiring is what it represents about observation and ingenuity. Wind had always blown. Sails on ships had captured it for centuries. But someone looked at that same force and asked, what if we could use this to work for us on land, continuously, reliably? The windmill teaches us that abundant resources often surround us unnoticed, waiting for someone creative enough to harness them. It reminds us that sustainable solutions, using renewable forces that cost nothing and never run out, have been part of human wisdom for centuries. Sometimes the best inventions don't consume resources. They dance with nature, partnering with forces that were there all along, turning what's freely given into human flourishing. Early humans could catch fish with their hands in shallow water or trap them in weirs, but these methods were limited and unreliable. Deep water held larger fish, but they were unreachable. Coastal communities struggled to access the ocean's abundance that swam just beyond their grasp. Spearing fish required perfect timing and worked only in clear, shallow areas. Humanity stood at the water's edge, hungry, watching food swim past just out of reach. Then, tens of thousands of years ago, someone carved or shaped the first fishing hook from bone, shell, or wood. This curved piece with a sharp point could be baited, lowered into deep water, and would catch onto a fish's mouth when it bit. Suddenly, the entire ocean became accessible. Fishermen could reach depths they'd never accessed before. They could fish at night, in murky water, from boats far from shore. The hook was patient, working even when humans couldn't see what was happening below the surface. Fishing transformed from opportunistic to reliable. Communities could depend on the ocean for sustenance. Coastal settlements flourished. Protein became abundant, supporting larger populations and healthier lives. Trade in dried fish connected coastal and inland peoples. The fishing hook, this simple curved tool, became one of humanity's most enduring inventions. Virtually unchanged in its basic design for millennia because it worked so perfectly. What the fishing hook teaches us is about extending our reach beyond natural limitations. Humans aren't built for underwater hunting. We can't hold our breath long enough, see clearly enough, or move fast enough in water, but with a simple tool, we gained access to an entire ecosystem. The hook reminds us that innovation often means creating tools that work where we cannot, doing the job patiently while we attend to other things. Sometimes the best inventions are those that labor on our behalf in places we cannot go, gathering resources from realms beyond our natural domain. Imagine trying to move a massive boulder with your bare hands. You push with all your strength, but it doesn't budge. The stone might weigh 1,000 pounds while you can lift only 100. For early humans, moving heavy objects seemed impossible without gathering dozens of people. Building monuments, clearing fields, constructing shelters, everything depended on raw muscle power, and there were limits to what human bodies could achieve alone. Then someone made a profound discovery, so ancient we don't know who first understood it. If you place a long beam across a pivot point and push down on one end, you can lift enormous weights on the other end. The lever had been invented. With the right lever and fulcrum, one person could move what previously required many. Archimedes, the Greek mathematician, famously declared, "Give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it, and I shall move the world." The lever changed everything about human capability. Farmers could pry rocks from fields. Builders could lift massive stones to construct pyramids and temples. Workers could open heavy doors, raise water from wells, and move cargo that should have been impossible. The lever appeared in countless forms: crowbars, seesaws, pliers, wheelbarrows. It became one of the 6 classical simple machines that underlie nearly every complex tool we've ever created. What makes the lever so beautiful is its elegant physics. It doesn't create energy from nothing. It transforms the energy we already have, trading distance for force. By moving the long end of the lever a great distance, we gain enormous force at the short end. The lever teaches us that intelligence can triumph over brute strength. It reminds us that understanding how the world works, grasping principles like leverage and mechanical advantage, gives us power beyond our physical limitations. Sometimes the greatest inventions are the simplest ones. Tools so fundamental they've been amplifying human potential for thousands of years. The earliest plows were wooden sticks dragged through soil, barely scratching the surface. They worked in the light, sandy soils of the Mediterranean and Middle East. But when farmers encountered heavy, clay-rich earth in northern Europe and other regions, wooden plows simply failed. The soil was too dense, too sticky. It clung to wood and stopped progress. Vast, fertile lands remained uncultivated because the tools weren't strong enough to break through. Civilization's expansion was limited by the strength of the plow. Then, around 1000 BCE, blacksmiths began forging iron blades for plows. Iron could cut through heavy soil that defeated wood. It stayed sharp longer, penetrated deeper, and didn't break as easily. The iron plow didn't just improve farming, it unlocked entirely new territories for agriculture. Suddenly, the thick soils of northern Europe became farmland. Forests could be cleared and converted to fields. Food production soared in regions that had been barely habitable. The iron plow enabled the agricultural foundation that would support medieval Europe's growth, feeding larger populations and making permanent settlements possible in challenging environments. This wasn't just a better version of the same tool. It was the key that opened locked doors. What the iron plow teaches us is about breaking through barriers that seemed permanent. For generations, certain lands were considered unfarmable, certain goals impossible, simply because the tools weren't adequate. The iron plow reminds us that sometimes our limitations aren't about our effort or determination, but about having the right tool for the specific challenge. Progress often requires matching our tools to our environment, understanding that what works in one context may fail in another. When we forge stronger implements, we don't just do old tasks better, we make entirely new things possible, turning obstacles into opportunities and wasteland into abundance. The wheel alone is just a circle. For years after humans first created round objects, they remained limited in usefulness. You could roll something, but you couldn't attach it to anything. You couldn't build with it or use it to move heavy loads efficiently. The breakthrough wasn't the wheel itself. It was understanding how to pair it with something else, the axle. This simple wooden rod passing through the wheel's center allowed it to rotate freely while remaining connected to a cart or mechanism. This partnership changed everything. With wheels mounted on axles, a single ox could pull loads that previously required dozens of people. Chariots carried warriors into battle at speeds that terrified enemies on foot. Potter's wheels spun smoothly, letting craftsmen shape clay with precision and speed. Water wheels harnessed rivers to grind grain, pump water, and power early machinery. The wheel and axle became one of the fundamental machines, appearing in countless variations across every civilization. What makes this invention so profound is that it required thinking about connection, not just individual parts. The wheel needed the axle. The axle needed the wheel. Neither was revolutionary alone, but together they became one of humanity's most important tools. This principle of synergy appears throughout innovation. Components that seem ordinary become extraordinary when combined thoughtfully. The wheel and axle teach us to look for partnerships, to ask not just what something can do alone, but what it might accomplish when properly connected to something else. Sometimes the greatest inventions aren't single brilliant objects, but simple combinations that work together in ways that multiply their individual potential. Progress often comes from understanding that the whole can be far greater than the sum of its parts. For most of human history, people didn't understand cleanliness. They washed occasionally, but dirt and grime were considered normal, even inevitable. Diseases spread mysteriously through communities. Infections killed routinely after injuries. Childbirth was deadly, partly because no one knew that unwashed hands carried invisible killers. People lived shorter, sicker lives, surrounded by dangers they couldn't see and didn't know how to fight. Then, thousands of years ago, ancient Babylonians discovered something remarkable. When they mixed animal fats with wood ash and water, they created a substance that could lift away dirt and grime in ways water alone never could. Soap had been invented, though its true power wouldn't be understood for millennia. Initially used for cleaning textiles and preparation of wool, soap slowly became recognized for personal hygiene. But the real revolution came in the 1800s, when scientists finally understood that washing with soap didn't just make you look clean, it killed bacteria and prevented disease. Suddenly, simple hand washing became one of medicine's most powerful tools. Doctors who washed between patients stopped spreading deadly infections. Mothers who bathed their babies reduced infant mortality. Workers who could clean properly stayed healthier. Soap, this simple mixture of fats and alkali, became humanity's first line of defense against invisible microbial enemies that had plagued us since the beginning. What soap teaches us is profound. Sometimes the most important inventions are the ones that become so ordinary we forget their significance. We wash our hands dozens of times daily without thinking about the millions of lives saved by this simple act. Soap reminds us that not all heroes wear capes or make dramatic announcements. Some come in quiet bars that sit beside our sinks, working silently every day to keep us safe from dangers we can't see. The greatest protection is often the simplest, repeated faithfully, transforming invisible threats into harmless residue washed down the drain. In the mid-1800s, milk was dangerous. Children died from drinking contaminated dairy. Beer and wine spoiled unpredictably, ruining entire batches and bankrupting brewers. Food poisoned people regularly because no one understood why some foods made you sick while others didn't. Families had to choose between fresh food that might kill them or preserved food stripped of nutrition. Invisible enemies lurked in what should have nourished us. Then French scientist Louis Pasteur made a discovery that would save countless lives. He proved that microorganisms caused food to spoil and spread disease. More importantly, he found that heating liquids to specific temperatures for specific times could kill these harmful bacteria without destroying the food's quality. This process, named pasteurization after him, made food predictable and safe. The transformation was immediate and profound. Milk could be stored and transported without turning deadly. The infant mortality rate dropped dramatically. Wine and beer became reliable products. Eventually, pasteurization extended to juice, canned goods, and countless other foods. People could trust what they ate and drank. The invisible threat had been conquered not by eliminating bacteria entirely, but by controlling them intelligently. What pasteurization teaches us goes beyond food safety. Pasteur showed that understanding a problem at its root level, seeing the invisible causes, allows us to create elegant solutions. He didn't just mask symptoms, he addressed the fundamental issue. Pasteurization reminds us that scientific knowledge applied practically can transform daily life in ways more powerful than grand inventions. Sometimes the greatest impact comes not from creating something new, but from making what we already have safe, reliable, and trustworthy. When we understand the hidden dangers in our world, we gain the power to protect ourselves and those we love. Before nails, building anything permanent was extraordinarily difficult. Structures had to be tied together with rope that rotted, pegged with wooden dowels that split, or mortised with joints that required master craftsmanship. Every connection was time-consuming and required skill most people didn't have. Houses were fragile. Furniture fell apart. Building even a simple shed might take weeks of careful carpentry. The world was held together precariously. Then, ancient metalworkers discovered they could forge small metal spikes with pointed ends and flat heads. The nail was born, a simple piece of metal that could be driven through wood to create strong, permanent connections. What seemed like such a basic object was actually revolutionary. Anyone could use a nail. You didn't need years of training. A few strikes with a hammer and pieces of wood became durably joined. Suddenly, construction became accessible to ordinary people. Houses could be built faster and stronger. Furniture became reliable. Ships could be assembled with hulls that wouldn't leak. Barns, bridges, and buildings rose across landscapes where skilled joiners were scarce. The nail democratized construction itself, making sturdy shelter available to everyone, not just those who could afford master carpenters. Entire industries emerged. Nail-making was one of early America's most important manufacturing sectors. What makes the nail so significant is what it represents about progress. It's not glamorous, it doesn't inspire awe, but it solved a fundamental problem so well that it enabled everything else. The nail teaches us that civilization isn't built on grand inventions alone, but on countless small solutions that make complex tasks simple. The humblest tools, the ones we barely notice, are often the ones that make modern life possible. Sometimes the greatest inventions are the ones that disappear into the background, working invisibly to hold our world together, one simple connection at a time. For ancient builders, there was a fundamental problem with stone. It was strong in compression. You could stack stones high, but weak in spanning distances. Place a flat stone across two columns, and it would crack under its own weight if the gap was too wide. Stone beams limited the size of doorways, windows, and interior spaces. Buildings remained small and dark, their potential constrained by the physics of straight lines. Then, thousands of years ago, builders in Mesopotamia, and later perfected by the Romans, discovered something extraordinary. If you arrange stones in a curve, each one cut at an angle to fit against its neighbors, and place a keystone at the top, something magical happens. The weight pressing down actually locks the stones together more tightly. The arch becomes stronger under load, not weaker. Stone, which couldn't span distances in straight lines, could leap across vast spaces when arranged in curves. The arch transformed architecture completely. Roman aqueducts carried water across valleys on stone bridges that still stand 2,000 years later. Cathedrals soared to heavens with vaulted ceilings that seemed to defy gravity. Massive doorways welcomed people into grand spaces. Underground tunnels and sewers could be built that wouldn't collapse. The arch made possible buildings of scale and beauty that previous generations couldn't imagine. What makes the arch so profound is what it teaches about structure and forces. The Romans didn't make stone stronger. They understood how forces flow and arranged their materials to work with those forces rather than against them. The arch reminds us that limitations are often about arrangement, not materials. Sometimes breakthrough innovation comes from understanding natural principles deeply enough that we can work with them elegantly. When we align our designs with how the world actually works, we can achieve things that seem impossible. The arch stands as a permanent reminder that intelligence and understanding can overcome physical limitations, turning apparent weaknesses into unexpected strengths. Ancient cities faced an impossible challenge. People needed water, but settlements grew far from rivers and springs. carrying water by hand, bucket by bucket, limited how large a city could become. You couldn't build a thriving civilization if everyone spent hours daily hauling water from distant sources. Disease spread when people shared contaminated local wells. Cities remained small, their populations constrained by the simple fact that water was heavy and sources were far away. Then Roman engineers conceived something audacious. They would build channels, aqueducts, that carried water across vast distances, using gravity alone to keep it flowing. These weren't simple ditches. They were precisely engineered structures that maintained exact slopes over miles, tunneling through mountains and spanning valleys on massive arched bridges. Water flowed from distant springs directly into cities, arriving clean and abundant. Rome eventually had 11 major aqueducts delivering hundreds of millions of gallons daily. The impact was staggering. Cities could grow to populations of 1 million people. Public baths became centers of social life and hygiene. Fountains flowed continuously. Sewers flushed waste away. Romans enjoyed running water in their homes, a luxury most of the world wouldn't experience again for nearly 2,000 years. The aqueduct didn't just bring water, it brought health, prosperity, and the foundation for urban civilization on a scale never before possible. What the aqueduct teaches us is about infrastructure and vision. Roman engineers didn't solve the water problem temporarily or partially. They built permanent solutions that would serve generations. Some Roman aqueducts still carry water today, 2 millennia later. The aqueduct reminds us that the greatest investments are those that serve not just immediate needs but future possibilities. Sometimes progress requires thinking beyond quick fixes to create lasting systems that enable entire civilizations to flourish. When we build well, we build for centuries. Before candles, darkness ruled human life. The sun set and the world became dangerous and unproductive. Fires provided light, but they required constant attention, couldn't be moved easily, and filled rooms with smoke. Oil lamps worked but were expensive, messy, and still anchored you to one spot. People lived on the sun's schedule because portable, controlled light simply didn't exist. Nighttime meant stopping everything except sleep. Then, thousands of years ago, probably by accident, someone discovered that animal fat wrapped around a wick would burn slowly and steadily. The candle was born. It was simple, tallow or beeswax molded around a fiber wick. But it changed everything. Light became portable. You could carry illumination from room to room, down dark corridors, into cellars and workshops. Candlelight wasn't bright by modern standards, but it was controlled, safe, and accessible. Churches held services after dark. Scholars studied late into the night. Craftsmen extended their working hours. Travelers could navigate dark inns. Families could gather in the evening without sitting in darkness. The candle gave humans the first real freedom from the sun's tyranny. What makes the candle significant isn't its brightness, but its availability. Rich and poor alike could afford candles. They democratized nighttime, making productive hours accessible to everyone, not just the wealthy who could afford elaborate oil lamps. The candle teaches us that sometimes the most important innovations aren't the most powerful or efficient. They're the ones that reach everyone. When a technology becomes affordable and simple enough that anyone can use it, it doesn't just improve individual lives. It shifts entire cultures, extending the productive day and giving humanity permission to remain active, creative, and connected even after the sun disappears. Sometimes liberation comes in small flames that push back the darkness just enough.